The company that invented portable music lost the digital music revolution. Sony created the Walkman, one of the most influential consumer devices ever built. And through Sony Music, it owned one of the largest music catalogs in the world. Few companies in history have controlled both the technology people use to listen to music and the artists who created it. On paper, Sony should have owned the future of digital music. But when music moved from discs to files, someone else built the system that replaced it. Because inside Sony, two empires were fighting each other. One side of the company wanted to build the future, the other side wanted to protect the past. And while Sony struggled to reconcile those two goals, Apple quietly built the ecosystem that changed the music industry forever. This is the story of why Sony lost the music future. To understand how Sony lost this moment, you have to go back to a time when the company looked almost unbeatable. In the late 20th century, Sony stood at the center of global entertainment technology. Its products defined how people experienced music in their everyday lives, and its brand carried enormous cultural authority. The Walkman had already changed the world once. For the first time in history, music became truly portable. People could carry albums in their pockets and listen through headphones wherever they went. The Walkman transformed music from something shared in living rooms and cars into something deeply personal. It was not simply a device, it was a cultural shift. Sony understood something powerful about the relationship between technology and entertainment. If a company could control both the device and the content, it could shape the entire experience. So Sony made a bold strategic move. It bought a record label. Sony Music quickly became one of the largest music companies in the world, controlling catalogs that included some of the most influential artists of the era. With that acquisition, Sony seemed perfectly positioned for the future. It could build the devices, and it could supply the music. Few companies had ever possessed that level of vertical integration in entertainment. But that same structure contained the seeds of a future problem. Because Sony was not truly a single company. It was two powerful organizations living under the same roof. On one side were the engineers and hardware designers who built devices. On the other side were the executives who ran the music label and protected the company's catalog. For years, those two worlds coexisted comfortably. Hardware drove demand for music, and music reinforced the appeal of Sony's devices. But the arrival of the internet began to change that balance. By the late 1990s, a new format started spreading across personal computers: MP3. MP3 files were small enough to move easily across the internet, yet good enough in quality that most listeners could barely hear the difference from a CD. Suddenly, entire albums could be stored on a computer, copied in seconds, and shared across networks that record labels did not control. To Sony's engineers, the implication was obvious. Portable music players would no longer depend on tapes or discs. They would depend on files. Music collections would live on hard drives. Songs would move between devices through software rather than physical media. And the companies that built the devices people carried in their pockets would define the next era of listening. Sony had everything it needed to build that future. But the music executives inside Sony saw the situation very differently. To them, digital files represented an existential threat. MP3 meant losing control over distribution. It meant losing control over copying. It meant losing the carefully structured system of retail stores, physical formats, and licensing agreements that had supported the music industry for decades. Inside Sony, those two visions collided. Engineers argued that the company should embrace MP3 and lead the digital transition. Music executives argued that enabling MP3 playback would accelerate piracy and destroy the value of recorded music. The debate became an internal stalemate. Sony could not fully embrace digital music without threatening its own record label, and it could not protect its record label without slowing down its hardware innovation. So the company tried to compromise. Sony released early digital music players, but they were deliberately limited. Instead of allowing simple MP3 playback, Sony pushed its own proprietary audio format called A-Track. Users who wanted to move music onto a Sony device had to convert their files. They had to use Sony software. They had to operate within Sony's controlled ecosystem. The strategy was designed to protect music rights. but from a consumer perspective, it made digital music unnecessarily complicated. At exactly the same moment that Sony was adding friction, the internet was teaching users to expect simplicity. People wanted to download a song, drag it to a device, and press play. No conversions, no restrictions, no complicated software. And this is where another company entered the story: Apple. At the beginning of the 2000s, Apple was not yet the dominant technology giant it would later become. But Steve Jobs saw something that Sony, despite all its experience in music technology, could not act on decisively. Digital music was inevitable, and the company that made digital music simple would control the future of the industry. Apple built the iPod. The hardware itself was elegant, but hardware alone was not the breakthrough. The true innovation was the system surrounding it. Apple created iTunes. Instead of fighting the music industry, Apple negotiated with it. Jobs convinced the major record labels to sell digital songs legally through a single store, with a simple and predictable pricing model. 99 cents per song. For consumers, the experience was revolutionary. You could buy a track instantly, download it in seconds, sync it to your iPod with a single click. Thousands of songs could now live in your pocket. The system worked because every part of it was aligned. One device, one store, one software platform. And while Apple was building that ecosystem, Sony was still struggling with its internal conflict. The hardware engineers understood what the market needed, but the music label feared losing control over its catalog. Every step toward a simpler digital future felt like a step toward weakening the company's own rights management. That hesitation slowed Sony down. And in technology markets, hesitation is often fatal. The iPod quickly became the dominant digital music player of the 2000s. Within a few years, iTunes had become the largest music retailer in the United States. The ecosystem Sony was uniquely positioned to create now belonged to Apple. The irony was difficult to ignore. Sony had invented the Walkman and transformed portable listening. It owned one of the largest music catalogs in the world. It possessed world-class engineering talent and global consumer electronics distribution. Yet the company that defined the digital music era was Apple, because Apple did something Sony could not. It aligned technology, content, and distribution behind a single vision. Sony divided those responsibilities between competing internal interests. By the mid-2000s, Apple's dominance in digital music was clear. Millions of people carried iPods, and iTunes had become the gateway through which consumers purchased songs legally online. And even as Sony tried to respond with its own digital initiatives, the next transformation was already beginning. Portable music was about to become only one feature inside a much larger device, the smartphone. Apple integrated the iPod directly into the iPhone, turning music playback into just one part of a broader ecosystem of apps, services, and media consumption. Sony still produced high-quality hardware. It still owned valuable music rights. But the moment where those strengths could define the future had passed. The deeper lesson is not simply about MP3 players. It is about organizational structure and strategic alignment. Sony did not lose the digital music revolution because it lacked technology or talent. It lost because the company could not resolve the conflict between protecting its existing business and inventing the next one. The music division defended the past. The hardware division tried to build the future, and the company never fully committed to either path. Technology history repeatedly shows that the most dangerous competitor is not always an external rival. Sometimes the greatest obstacle is the fear of disrupting your own success. The companies that shape the future are willing to dismantle parts of their own business before someone else does it for them. Sony protected the CD. Apple built the ecosystem that replaced it, and that shift did not just change how people listen to music. It reshaped the entire industry, from distribution to pricing to artist discovery. But the digital music revolution did not begin with Apple. It began with something far more chaotic, a platform that allowed millions of people to share music freely across the internet, without permission and without payment. A platform that proved digital music could spread faster than any record label could control. And that story begins with Napster.